Chris Brown,
Hello.
Sea Breezy.
Yeah.
I'm sure you love that.
Oh, it's such a blessing.
Yeah, that's the first time you've heard that, I bet.
First time ever, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining me. Chris is a fellow therapist. We work together in a treatment center. And Chris, before I ask you a bunch of questions, I just wanted to mention that you are probably the most thorough therapist that I've ever personally met. When I think about your work, I view you as like a detective with all, like when you go into, when you see on TV, when you see the detectives with all the pieces of paper and like their whole wall is filled with, like they're solving a case, that's you. Like you've got family trees and genograms and you are the most thorough therapist, and you do so much research and you study clients and you try to really figure it out. And I think it's something that has inspired me personally. And I think it's really cool to see. It's something I admire about you.
Yeah.
Just wanted to suck up to you a little bit.
Well, that's quite the introduction. Thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you for the kind words. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in therapy and what led you into this path. I know obviously your wife is a therapist.
Yeah. I mean, man, I've always been geared towards helping people. I mean, even just in middle school, like I was always the kid that when a new out-of-state kid would move in or start school, they would, talk to me and ask me to like take them under their wing. And I actually like hate that. I just wanted to hang out with my friends, but it's just been helping people has just been part of my life for a long time. I feel like it's something that comes really naturally. I'm sure we'll get more into that story later, but the long and short of it was, yes, my wife's a therapist. She's brilliant. She's smart. And when we were first married, she was finishing up grad school. And so I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I hated reading, but I found myself reading her books that she would leave around.
Yeah.
Because she would be gone, she was working full time and then going to grad school at night. And so
I didn't know you hated reading.
I hated
because knowing
reading.
you now, you are such an avid reader.
I know. I can't stop reading.
Yeah.
So anyways, I mean, I would pick up her books and start reading and be like, this is fascinating. Like I distinctly remember picking up The Body Keeps the Score.
Mm-hmm.
And there were numerous times where she would come to me and go like, did you read this? You underlined in this. And, and she kind of instilled that in me. She's like, you should be a therapist. You'd be great at it. And I did the classic guy thing, rejected the idea for years. And then one of my best buddies, who was actually the best man in my wedding, we go out to coffee one day and he goes, you should be a therapist. And I was like, dude, you're right. And so anyways, came home, told my wife, I was like, Tian thinks I should be a therapist and I think he's right. And
she gets no credit.
She gets no credit and I have not heard the end of it. Yeah. So that's really how it started. I went back to school about like age 27 and just powered through. Finished up my undergrad in my MFT program, and here I am.
Yeah. Did you ever go to therapy prior to that as a client, and how did that inform your own viewpoint about therapy, or did it pique your interest further, or tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. I went to therapy, let's see here. I mean, like the first time I traditionally went to therapy was probably when I was around a senior in high school, after my dad passed. We went to family therapy and I hated it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I distinctly remember sitting in this therapist's office with my whole entire family, and it's like right after my dad died and we're all heartbroken. And he asked some question, I can't even remember what, and I got so upset and I like stormed out of the office, and I think that was the last time I went back. I didn't want anything to do with it.
Wow.
And then, gosh, I think maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, I really started going back to therapy. One of my really good friends went through a really like scary medical scare out of nowhere, and it really kind of brought up a lot of stuff in me. And so I started seeking therapy through that, and I've been off and on for a while, and in various capacities. And man, yeah, this last like 7, 8 years, I've loved it. It's been so life-giving, and man, just like a valuable resource to have.
Yeah. And do you think a large part of that is finding a therapist that fit for you and that
Yeah.
you felt like understood and clicked? And
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you work with a number of therapists, it's unrealistic to think that you're going to hit it off with everyone. And I'm certainly no like outlier there. I've had therapists where it's just like, you feel like you're talking to a doorknob,
for
you're
sure.
just like, come on,
Yeah.
dude, like be a human being.
Yeah.
And then I've had, 2 or 3 really exceptional therapists that have connected and show up in the room and are like willing to just be their authentic self, which I think it's my point of view that that's what's needed more than any kind of theory out there.
I couldn't agree more. I'm curious, and something we spoke about before we started was your relationship to religion, because I know that was a big part of your upbringing. How does that, tell me a little bit more about your journey through religion and how that has shown up in therapy, whether personally or how it informs your work as a therapist, and just your viewpoint and how it's evolved over the years as it pertains to religion.
Yeah. I mean, that is a loaded question.
Yeah, it is.
Let's see here. So I was raised in a Christian family. I'm born and raised in Orange County. And if you live in Orange County, you know that there is a very big like Lutheran bubble. So I grew up in that bubble and went to the same church with all my siblings that my parents had gone to for a number of years. Very grateful for that. And I mean, basically went through Christian schooling all the way into like college, honestly. So it was always a big part of my life. It was a big part of our family. It was instilled in us that like this is something to fall back on always. And yeah, it was great. I think as I started getting older, well, actually, let me back up. I think it should be said that like there was a part of me where I thought I was supposed to be a pastor for a really long time.
That.
Yeah. And I mean, that was the plan. I even went to school for some of that, out of high school, thinking that that's what I wanted to do. And I started realizing as I got older that, okay, like I can agree. I agree with this Jesus person, right, in the Bible, and I like can acknowledge that there's a God, but I can't seem to separate that from the church, right? And there were like two very distinct things to me. If you think of church, I think they do a lot of good, and I think they do a lot of damage, right? Like any human being.
Yeah.
But I started realizing like, man, I can't separate that. And a lot of the things that the church stands for just doesn't seem to really align with who I understand this Jesus person to be. And so, I think what that's looked like over the years is, really shifting out of like a religious context and more into like a spiritual context, right? I think there was like a part too there where, along in that pastoral pursuit, I was involved in a church, and how to mentor. And, unfortunately, it was like kind of like this perfect storm, right? Where I had lost my dad, and we can get in, like I said, we can get into that later. But I basically, what happened, like looking back on it now, ran straight to this person, right? Because here it is, my life just fell apart.
Yeah.
And what I knew was church and faith was what you fall back on. That was so instilled in me. But what I didn't realize was I went and sought out a mentor that was essentially a replication of my father. At least my father's like negative traits, right? And so looking back at that now, I'm like, okay, that's spiritual abuse, right? Like what I went through and what the relationship that we had. And I mean spiritual abuse in the sense of like, someone saying like, oh, God told me that you need to do this, and if I didn't do that, then these things that were promised were taken away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's pitched in this idea of, it's like almost implicit. It's not like we're going to take this away from you. It's like, oh, you're not a good Christian. You're not ready for this yet. It's not like an explicit, you're not going to get this. It was just like, hey, you're not ready.
Yeah.
And so, I think that was really hard and damaging. But I think that's ultimately like what kind of set me on this pursuit of, like kind of separating the two things, the like higher power or God, and the church. And again, I'm not knocking the church. That was my experience.
Yeah.
My son goes to a Christian school. I still go to church from time to time when he's like singing in church. Like I don't have any problem like interacting with it.
Yeah.
But it's just what I've kind of found in the last couple of years and really through my sobriety and engaging in the 12 steps, is kind of like a more spiritual aspect.
Yeah.
That was a very long-winded answer.
Yeah.
But
No, I think it was necessary, and I think it created a lot of clarity for me in understanding you. But I'm curious also the grief part of things. You mentioned your dad. So falling back on the church, if that didn't seem to give you what you needed, how did you handle that grief around your dad? Is that something you feel is something you're still working through?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think grief is something that's never done, at least with like core figures in your life, right? Something like a father or a mother. I mean, I'll tell you how I handled it. I started drinking. I started, smoking cigarettes and partying, which I never did until that. But I mean, I was just in so much pain.
Yeah.
And then all the while, like still engaging in church and still claiming like this life. And so it was like just this unprocessed, unacknowledged like pain. Does that
Did
make
that
sense?
create more shame, you think?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like on this side, you're trying to play this part, I should be doing this, but then on this other side, you're dealing with this pain in these ways that are more negative, right?
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of shame spiral right there.
100%.
Yeah.
It was like this vicious cycle.
Given.
I mean, I don't think it was an accident that like the alcohol thing was like working for me, right? Because I could just shut it off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would be in church and, I'd hear like the sermon, or I would hear like, you hear Bible verses like, God works all things together, or all good things are like through God. And like those that love him. I'm butchering that. I mean, it's been a minute since I've opened the Bible, but like, I would hear that and I would just be like so filled with rage because it didn't make sense. And I'm just like, how could you possibly say that? You don't know what I'm going through, which wasn't true. Everybody knew what I was going through. But there was just that rage there because I just couldn't wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the rage around? Like, where'd that stem from?
I think the rage was really connected to what happened with my dad. I don't know if this is a good time to get into that.
Yeah,
sure.
Share away. I know
So
parts of the story, but yeah, go for it.
I mean, basically, I grew up in a family. I'm the middle, and I have an older brother and a younger sister, and they're all 4 years apart. And my mom and my dad. And I just want to acknowledge that, like, this is my account of events. I'm not speaking for them. Like, they have their own experience. But yeah, I mean, I remember very distinctly, like, that my family was very tight knit and very wholesome and welcoming and loving. But we also, like, struggled for money. And I remember being aware of that. And that essentially, like, changed overnight. Where, it was like, literally had a conversation where, like, dad was like, hey, we don't have to worry about money anymore. And within a month, we were living in, like, this huge house, and it had a tennis court, and there's a Porsche and a BMW in the driveway. And, like, now all of a sudden, like, I have all these toys and all this stuff. And this is around, like, time I was in 4th grade. And yeah, I mean, essentially what had happened was the FBI showed up at the house one day while I was getting ready to go to school. I think by now I'm like, yeah, never a good thing. And it looks exactly like it does in the movies. They have the jackets and the gold letters. And yeah, I was, like, brushing my teeth. I remember that, getting ready to go to school, and looked out the window just randomly, and there they were. And so they arrested my father. And yeah, I mean, it was very odd because he was back the next day in the house and was just like, everything's fine. Everything's cool. I'm not involved in this. I can get out of this. And this went on for years where that was the story. Everything's fine. Everything's cool. But each year the house is getting smaller. The money struggles are back. And essentially, like, that goes all the way up to, like, my senior year. And my dad this whole time had been going to Florida to testify in this case and assuring us that, like, hey, I'm not going to get in trouble for this, like, yada, yada. And well, the police show up again, right? And they go, where's your dad? And, well, he's supposed to be in Florida with you. And he went missing for a week. We couldn't find him. And essentially what had happened was it was now his turn to be sentenced in the case. And he knew that and chose to kill himself, right? And so, I mean, as you can imagine, devastating. Yeah. Like, heartbreaking. The worst pain I think I've ever felt. And just completely, like, upended any sense of security or foundation I had.
And you didn't know it was time for sentencing? Or
had no idea.
So all of this was just completely shocking.
Yeah. And it's just like, whoa, like, how do you wrap your head around that?
The world just flips in a moment. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, it'll be like 15 years in November this year. And I mean, looking back on it now, I can see, like, oh, like, this is why it was so earth-shattering, because of the wounds that it caused. And here are the wounds that it caused. But back then, it was just, like, such shock. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
traumatic.
Yeah.
To say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think when you ask me about grief, I mean, that's been a long, painful road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and a lot of emotions tied up in that, I'm sure. Like
100%.
I would assume some sense of betrayal, some sense of you tell me. I don't know. I haven't been in
Yeah,
that
I mean,
situation. What
yeah,
came up for you?
I think, betrayal, like a real big sense of like gaslighting.
Mm.
Um, like I couldn't trust what was real and
Yeah.
what wasn't, anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is common when people lose loved ones to suicide. Is like, oh, I could have done something more. But then there's also the religious aspect of it where, I mean, we had an incredible group of people because we were involved in this church show up and like wrap around us. And, you know, I can say what I want about my experience with the church, but I can't deny that like it could have been so much worse if I didn't have people around me, or if I wasn't going to the school that I was going to, because we really had people look out for us,
Yeah.
you know, and still that like check in,
Yeah.
you know, I can't deny that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I mean, so much anger and sadness, and it was so complicated, and still is sometimes on some days where it's like I'm grieving like my father dying, but then there's also this other aspect of it where like you have to accept what it means when someone chooses to take their life.
Yeah.
You know, and it was so confusing to be 18, to be ready to start getting ready to like graduate. I mean, I was filling out like my college application, you know, and getting ready to like launch into the world, and then this person that's supposed to be there is not there anymore.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Complicated in the sense of like, how much did you really know him? I would assume, I don't want to assume, I'm just bringing this up as I'm trying to place myself in those shoes for a second. Like, was that difficult for you or did you feel like you knew your dad, or do you still struggle with what was the relationship in the way that I saw it versus what it really was?
Yeah, I mean, my dad and I were like super close. You know, we would always like smoke cigars together, even when I was underage. Like, so like that was our thing, you know, and we would go out at night to the park or go sit in the hot tub or something like that, smoke a cigar, and we would just talk. And so, yeah, we were super, super close. So, yeah, man, I think it was just, it just puts a question mark on everything that you thought you were sure of. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure you get this now, like being a parent yourself, like, you know, like look back at that and have question marks on these really big pieces. Yeah. You know, it's just like, how do you make sense of it? Yeah. Yeah.
How does that inform your approach to parenthood, fatherhood?
Yeah, it's tricky, man.
Yeah.
It's tricky. You know, I think there was a long time where I demonized my dad, or I villainized him because of what he did and what he was involved in. And it was like the knee-jerk reaction was just to like punk rock, like rebel, like I'm going to do the exact opposite. Whatever I do, I will never be that man. And I think as I've grieved and as I've healed, I've been able to acknowledge that, like, okay, like, I don't condone anything that he did, right? It completely wrong, no question about it, shouldn't have happened, right? And I can also see the human in him, right?
Yeah.
And I can acknowledge that he instilled a lot of these attributes that I have in myself. Yeah. You know, that I like about myself, that my wife values. So I think how it informs my parenting is I think the temptation again is it came up with our first son, like who's 4.5 now, but it came back up again when I had him, where I was like, I'm going to do everything opposite. And because I had this experience, and I think what I've had to do is let go of that and go, okay, my son is completely separate from this.
Yeah.
And he is his own person. He is his own individual. And my job is to put my stuff aside and be a dad for my son.
Yeah.
Right. And who my son needs me to be.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's one way. I think I put a big emphasis on the value of family, on parenting and being available to my son, being able to teach him, things. Not that my dad didn't teach me things, but my dad was just not that person. Like my dad was always like, let's go hire somebody to fix this. And that's fine if that's you, but like, that's not me.
Yeah.
I love working with my hands. I love tools. I have like my mountain bike.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's take this thing apart and figure it out. And so I'm trying to get my son involved in this stuff as much as possible.
Yeah. That's quality time.
Absolutely.
It's connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my son knows how to like, take the cap off my mountain bike and like put the tire pump on and pump it,
Yeah.
And so that's like a proud dad moment for sure.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So obviously a lot of your own trauma, and you've healed. How did you find a way to heal through that? What was effective for you? And also, obviously through your own trauma, you can relate to so many other people that have similar experiences, different experiences, but you know a lot about trauma from your own experiences and through your work as a therapist. So what is your approach to trauma, and what was your experience of healing through your own trauma?
Yeah. I think my experience, again, like I went the maladaptive road as you initially, because I was in so much pain and I just wanted to like get out of the pain. So the way I did that was alcohol and drugs and,
but then when it shifted for you, what did that look like?
When it shifted is when I started getting into therapy. Okay. And so I got recommended to go try this thing called EMDR. Had no idea what it was. And it just like, it clicked. Yeah. What happened was I was walking around Old Town Orange a lot, and there would be these unmarked Crown Victorian cars. It's like the cop car, and I would see those and I would tense, I would tense up like without even thinking about it. And I was like, man, like something's not right here. And so that's what I started with in EMDR. And like, I started noticing, I was like, I don't get tense when I see police cars anymore. I don't get tense when I see the unmarked cars. Like, I'm free to just walk around, and that really kind of started and kickstarted all of that. And I think as I've gotten older and developed a relationship with my therapist now, it's been a lot of like naming a lot of the wounds, because when you experience a trauma, it kind of like serves as like almost like a knife coming down on a cutting board, right? It severs the timeline. Yeah. And so for the longest time, I couldn't access like pre-cop showing up at the house, right? And those memories. And it was just like, my childhood sucked. This is what happened. And that's just not the case. Yeah. And so a lot of my work now has been, and a lot of my healing has been getting back to like pre-trauma and putting that stuff together. So I think knowing what I know now about trauma, well, one, I'm certified in EMDR. I'm fascinated by it.
What is it for those that don't know?
Yeah. So EMDR, like you're going to realize why there's an acronym for it. It stands for Eye Movement Desensitization and Reprocessing. And really what it does is it uses something called bilateral stimulation, which is just a fancy word for your eyes move back and forth. When our eyes move back and forth, both sides of our brain are activated, which is not the case when you experience a trauma or when you're having a traumatic reaction to something. It's only one side of the brain, and it's your amygdala, which is your fight or flight response, that's activated. And so in EMDR is we essentially go in and we find what we call like a target or a core belief that's attached to this event. And we use, there's multiple different ways you can do it. I mean, you could do it the old fashioned way, which is how I was taught in grad school. And I think my shoulder is still thrown out from this, but like doing the, and you're just like following, right? The therapist's fingers like this, while you're intentionally thinking about this trauma. And what happens through that is the trauma or the wound in the brain is activated, but both sides of the brain are firing now. So now it can process all the way through. And it's not that it erases the memory, it takes away the fight, flight, or freeze response, right? So that's why I was able to stop tensing up, right, when I saw those cop cars. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense to me.
Yeah. It was developed in like 1984 by like a total like accident by this gal named Francine Shapiro. She was just walking through a park and noticed that her eyes were moving when she thought of something, and then she wasn't as triggered. And I mean, it was like a totally freak accident, which I love that kind of stuff. Right? I love the nerdy backstory to things. So that is really what I'm passionate about, is working with clients who have been through trauma, that maybe have a PTSD diagnosis, and using EMDR to help them. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Do you feel like that's been the most effective way to get into those core memories or core beliefs through traumatic memories, and to reprocess how we, I guess, view it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You feel like that's the best way to process trauma?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, that's the best way that at least makes sense to me. I mean, I know there's other ways that are out there. I mean, even just talk therapy, you can do the same thing. Or there's brain spotting now.
Yeah.
But what I really love about EMDR is it's focused on the clients in control, right?
Yeah.
It's not dependent on the therapist asking questions. The therapist is there simply to prompt the client and make sure that they stay grounded, right? So when I think about that, it makes the most sense to me, because when we have a trauma because the situation was overwhelming, we were not in control. And so here we are now going back into this place of control and healing. And I mean, it's just so empowering. Yeah. It's empowering to watch. It's empowering to be the client. It just bypasses so many different things. Yeah.
I think it's amazing that you've had your own experience as a client. So you've seen firsthand what it can do for you. Yeah. So it's interesting. I do EMDR, but I've never done it on the client side. So I've never actually experienced, I mean, when you get trained, you kind of do a little quick little thing with it. So I kind of got a taste of it, but from the client side, I never got that full experience of going through my own traumas in that way. Something I still want to do.
You should try it, man.
Yeah.
I know a guy.
Yeah. Maybe after this, we can do a little therapy session. Sure. Yeah, perfect. So what's it like to be married to a therapist?
Yet another question. It's either something about my name, Chris Brown. I get asked about that all the time, and what it's like to be married to a therapist. Which I don't know if you have this experience, but if you ever like are in a situation where you're meeting new people and they go like, "Oh, what do you do for work?" And and you go, oh, I'm a therapist, they either like dump on you,
Yeah,
like all
for
of
sure.
their issues,
For sure.
or they're like, cool, dude, like, see you later.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, they get spooked real
Yeah,
quick.
it's either one or the
Yeah,
other.
for
There's never
sure.
any middle ground.
Yeah.
So that only intensifies when my wife and I are in a social setting, when we say we're both therapists.
Yeah.
But what it's like to be married to a therapist, I think it's exactly the same
Yeah.
as if I was married to a non-therapist. I think we've learned over the years that there's some things that we have to like keep an eye out for.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we meet with clients all day long. And so it's easy to come home and like, after we get the kids to bed, to sit on the couch and just kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, phone it in a little bit.
Yeah.
And still be in like therapy mode kind of. But I mean, that's just something you have to watch. I mean, I think every relationship has that. I think there's a lot more pros than there is cons for sure.
Yeah.
You know, like Sarah is a psychology nerd, so we nerd out together. Mm-hmm. It's like something we get to share in.
Yeah.
It's like, gosh, what was I going to say? She approaches it totally different.
What's the difference? What do you notice?
She's much more traditional, and I mean, well, one, she's interested in a totally different population than me. Like, so she's a certified eating disorder specialist. She's in Newport Beach and has her own private practice. And I'm really fascinated by trauma, and like that's the plan, is to focus on trauma. So there's that, but traditional meaning, she's much more, I think, reserved in the session, in terms of what she shares, how she approaches it. And again, it's what works for you at the end of the day.
For sure.
I think she does great work. I've seen her help a lot of people. But yeah, we're into different theories where we see things differently. And so it can be fun to consult sometimes. But again, it's like, if you're not careful, you're going to end up talking about that all day long. Yeah. Because we love it and we could totally do that. Yeah. Right. But yeah, man, I don't know. At the end of the day, it's like, we're just two people.
Yeah. I would bet though, the phrase, what's coming up for you, comes up a lot more in your marriage than it does in mine.
Yeah, maybe. For sure. She is much quicker to like pick up on my like nonverbal cues. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. The therapy jargon as a whole. Yeah. Yeah. When we talk about it, like Sarah and I were talking, and she asked me like, what's coming up, or how are you feeling about this? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, dude,
it's just funny.
Yeah, no, 100%. And we have days where like, I won't ever hear that, and it won't even register in my mind that was a therapy question. And then there's some days where it's like, dude, come on, and vice versa, right? Like, where it's like, that's the last thing I want to be asked right now. Yeah,
don't therapize me.
Don't do that.
My wife will say that on occasion. Don't therapize me.
I mean, dude, that applies into like parenthood too, right? Yeah. It's like, I don't want to pathologize my wife. I don't want to pathologize my kids. I just want home to be home. Yeah. And a place where this family lives and connects with each other, right? So it's interesting. I couldn't have guessed that this is the route that life was going to go in a million years. But it's life. It's like the route it's going, and it's great. Yeah.
So we talked a lot about trauma. We talked about Sarah's work with eating disorders. How do you feel about doing work with addiction? I mean, you mentioned your own sobriety.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's really where I got my start, at working at a residential treatment center. So I was exposed to that by chance again. I feel like every like cool thing is by chance, right?
Of course.
But what I was realizing was, oh, this is having an impact on me too, because I was consuming at the time substance. And so, yeah, it was like something I always contemplated and toyed around with, like maybe this is something I want to go into. And then I kept finding myself in these book studies, right, at work, reading out of the big book and going like, no, that's not me. You know, you'd read these chapters in the big book, and then, man, like the last one, it was just like, damn it.
There was no running.
They got me, dude. I felt like it was like a scene out of like The Great Escape where like the guys like shine the light on the prisoners when they're trying to escape. I was just like frozen. Damn, I'm caught.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to clarify too. Like, I wasn't like overtly dysfunctional, right, in my drinking. For me, it was more so like I recognized that that like, man, the father I want to be for my son and now sons, and the husband I want to be for my wife. I'm fairly certain that it's not possible if I continue to drink like this, right? And so I just went for it. You know, I was surrounded by these group of guys I was working with that had some like significant time under their belts, that have much gnarlier stories than me if we would compare, right? And I saw the freedom that they had, and I saw the lightness that they had, the way they carried themselves, and it was like intoxicating. Almost. I mean, no pun intended, but like, I didn't know these people, and yet every time I was around them, I was like, I feel like I could say anything to you guys and I would be accepted. And there's something to say about that when you come across it. And so yeah, man, I mean, I'm coming up on like 3 years, and
wow.
Yeah, so like I think like my work with addiction, like going back to that lightness, I mean, it's either you stay in that darkness, that heaviness that you're just trapped in, because it's, again, this cycle just repeats and repeats and repeats, or you step into this other way of being, which is terrifying. It's so scary.
It's like addressing your trauma head on as opposed to just escaping or blocking it out.
And so
it is terrifying.
Yeah, but what's on the other side of that is light. I mean, light in the way that you see the world, lightness in the way that you carry yourself. I mean, again, never in a million years did I think I would go down that road, and here I am, and it's like one of the best decisions I've ever made.
What else do you want the people to know about your work and the work you continue to do and the work you want to do? Where do you think this career is going to take you? Where do you want it to go?
To the moon.
To the moon.
No. Man, I mean, obviously I'm a big advocate for therapy. And I think it could look and needs to look a million different ways for a million different people, right? But I think really what I'm passionate about, what I think I want people to know is that, you know, if you're sitting down with a therapist and you don't feel like connected to them, that's okay. And that connection should be there.
It doesn't mean therapy doesn't work. It just means
it's just like not a good fit. It's like dating. Exactly. It's like you're not compatible, and it's all right, you know. And but man, when you get that connection, and it's like human to human, and that's like the
fucking fireworks.
Absolutely, it's like the bread and butter, man. Like that's the sweet spot. So, I mean, that's really what I try to do in my work. Yes, I read a ton of books. I listen to podcasts. I even read research articles.
You study. You are thorough, as I mentioned. You study.
Yeah. I mean, I was bummed out when I was in grad school. My last semester, I took assessments. And I was like, oh, dude, I think I should have gone to like a PsyD program.
How many people say that
I
after
know.
taking the
Yeah.
assessments
I was like,
class?
I wish I would have taken this
Yeah.
like first semester in
Yeah.
grad school, not the last. So I definitely would have pivoted. But man, it's just like, it's so life-giving, you know, and maybe that's down the road. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely not until the kids are older, I promise, Sarah. Like, you know, but yeah, I mean, dude, that's what I'm passionate about. I think at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We're all trying to figure this stuff out, even therapists. And that's what needs to be brought into the room, because that's where the transformation is set up to happen.
Isn't
right?
it? Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So I think what's on the docket in terms of like the future, the plan has always been to like have a private practice with Sarah, and kind of run our own shop. Again, we have different ideas right now, like what that looks like, but we can figure it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, I think that's really what I'm passionate about.
Yeah. What advice would you give to young people that maybe haven't addressed their trauma and are thinking about therapy and haven't really made that commitment yet?
Yeah, I think it's okay. It's okay that you're there. To have reservations and to have gone through something that has upended your world, it's okay to feel that way. I mean, in fact, it makes sense. It'd be weird if you didn't. And that there are like trained professionals out there that can help. And it doesn't, if it's the right, like the right connection, it's not going to be forced, right?
Yeah.
That's like a huge component of it. Yeah. It's not going to be forced. It's at your own pace. And at least for me, what I put a lot of emphasis on is making sure that the client feels safe to even go there. So it's like prep work before we even start, like the gnarly stuff of EMDR.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They have to trust you.
Right.
That they're safe and that you're not going to lead them astray.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, I think if you're out there and you find yourself having these like reactions to things, it's likely a response to trauma, whether you're like getting pissed off about something and just flying into a rage, or you're having this experience and you're like, I got to get the hell out of here now, or you're like freezing in your tracks. Yeah, that's like indicative of a trauma response. That's your nervous system, right? Reacting to what's going on in your brain, right? And so that's normal, and it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah. Right. And I mean, you're ready when you're ready. Yeah. Right. Which is the scary part, because there's a lot of people out there and there's a lot of gnarly stuff in this world. Right. Yeah. I mean, we see that every day at work. But man, my encouragement is just to get curious about it, and to seek support some way.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you're ready, you're ready. I often encourage people, though, not to kick that can down the road too far, you know?
Absolutely.
Because I think the more you avoid it, those maladaptive patterns, whether it be addiction or just relational dynamics that aren't beneficial or positive, those continue and continue and continue. And the trauma bleeds into your life and manifests in unhealthy ways if you just continue to put it off.
100%. And I mean, it's like that old saying, it's like everywhere you go, there you are. Right. It's gonna show up in every area of your life, whether you like it or not. Yeah. And we think about like a human being from like the biopsychosocial, and some people may even go like spiritual too. It's going to show up there too.
For sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And I assure you, there's hundreds of research papers out there, you know?
Yeah. You've read all of them.
I've read all of them that say the same thing. So yeah, I mean, it's on your own terms and it's on your own time. I agree. Like, don't kick the can down the road too far. and it's something that can transform your lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we wrap, tell us your Chris Brown story. You know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see here. Okay, so I went to a fairly small Christian high school, and they were very adamant about the students not drinking, or even being at a party where there was alcohol, even if it wasn't a student, like if it was a kid from another high school nearby. And so I showed up at a party, not knowing that there was going to be alcohol there. And yeah, I mean, there was alcohol there. And I swear to you, to this day, I did not drink that night. And so I was nervous. I was scared.
Thought you were going to get in trouble.
Right, because the school was so small that they would always find out.
Yeah.
And people would get suspended. Some people would even get expelled. Like, so that happened, and I'm kind of nervous about it over the weekend. And I go into school, and it's like Monday, and I get a slip, and it says like, please report to the dean of students. And I'm like, oh shit.
Here we go.
Yeah, here we go. And so I sit down at the dean's desk, and he looks at me, and he just goes, "Why did you do it?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Why did you do it?" And I just cracked. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know there was going to be alcohol there. I swear to you, I didn't drink. I left as soon as I realized there was alcohol there." And he just looks at me, and he's just like, "What?" And he goes, "I was talking about like Chris Brown and Rihanna, because like that whole thing had like unfolded." And so I basically like confessed and ratted on myself, which is like, I mean, me, like, me now, like that is like so on par for like my life experience and like what it's like to be me.
Yeah. Only you would that happen.
Yeah.
Just rat on yourself.
Yeah. I ratted on myself. That's the Chris Brown story, man.
Yeah. Chris Brown affected more than a few people that weekend.
Yeah, dude. I mean, ordering a pizza, freaking making a hotel reservation, you name it, I get questioned about it all the time. I remember when I turned 21, I went to a bar with my cousin, and they carded me, and I just so happened to be wearing the same outfit and even the same necklace, right, that was in my driver's license photo. And my ID said Christopher Brown on it, and they looked at me and they're like, "Get the hell out of here!" They thought it was fake, and I was like, "So I mean, it just never ended."
Yeah,
never ended. Yeah.
Sea breezy.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. We'll have to run it again. Well,
you've been sitting on that.
Yeah,
for a while.
I have. Thanks for joining me, man. Where could the people find you?
Psychology Today. My Instagram, at Chris Brown Therapy. Those are the two big ones right now. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Chris. We'll have to have you on again.
Dude,
we'll
thanks
have
for
to
having
run
me.
it again.
We'll have to do something like that. Yeah. Yeah, man. Thank you. It's awesome.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.